The storm was relentless, battering against the van's windows as Maya Carter gripped the steering wheel, her heart racing. She was miles from the nearest town, her children asleep in the back seat, unaware of the danger outside. Her car had just sputtered and died. Stranded. No cell service. Nothing. Just her, the kids, and the dark road ahead. And then, just when hope seemed lost, headlights appeared out of nowhere. A man in a worn-out jacket stepped out of the truck. His name was Nate, a mechanic who had no reason to help a stranger in distress. But in that moment, he did the unthinkable. He handed her the keys to his own truck and sent her to safety, without asking for a thing in return. What seemed like a simple act of kindness would set off a chain of events that would change Nate's life forever. From a quiet mechanic in a small town to the center of a whirlwind that would test his loyalty, courage, and past in ways he never imagined. But was he ready for the consequences of helping a stranger? Stay with us as we follow Nate on a journey that will not only push him to the limits of his own redemption, but prove that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come with the highest price. Lightning clawed across the sky like a warning. Thunder cracked seconds later, shaking the glass in the dashboard. The rain was relentless, heavy, pounding, angry. Maya Carter squinted through the windshield, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. Her 2008 Dodge Caravan shuddered like it had a secret. The check engine light had been blinking for weeks, but there was no room in her budget to fix it. Not with rent due and her youngest battling asthma. "Mom," whispered her 6-year-old son, Eli, from the back seat. "Are we going to be okay?" "We're fine, baby," she lied. The wipers squealed uselessly against the downpour as the engine coughed once, then again, and then died. The van coasted for a few more feet before surrendering to the mud-slathered shoulder of Highway 17. The world went still, except for the storm's fury. "No, no, no, no," Maya muttered, her breath fogging the windshield. She tried the ignition again. Nothing. Another try. Just a click. She glanced at her kids, Eli and 10-year-old Ava, huddled in blankets, wide-eyed and quiet. They were 30 miles from the nearest gas station. No cell service. No one in sight. Then came the headlights. 2 amber beams cut through the storm, growing brighter. A truck. Older model. Blue paint scratched and streaked with rust. It pulled up behind her, engine humming like a beast that had seen better days but still had fight in it. Maya's pulse quickened. She cracked the window a few inches. A man stepped out. He looked about 40. Ball cap. Grease-stained jacket. Square jaw, tired eyes. The kind of face life had carved its story into. He moved carefully, hand raised to show he meant no harm. "You okay?" he called over the ring. Maya hesitated. Broke down. He nodded. "I'm Nate. Mechanic. Live about 2 miles off the highway. Mind if I take a look?" Every instinct in her screamed caution, but the storm was growing worse, and her children were starting to shiver. She opened the door. Nate popped the hood and poked around with practiced hands. After a few minutes, he closed it gently. Fuel pump shot, and the battery's about gone. Maya closed her eyes. "Can it be fixed?" "Not out here. Not tonight." He looked at the sky. "This storm's gonna flood the valley. You don't want to be stuck here." He walked to his truck and opened the door. "Take it." She blinked. "What?" "My truck. Take it. Get the kids somewhere warm. There's a diner down the road. Generator. Dry clothes. I'll stay with the van. Fix it in the morning." "You can't be serious," she whispered. He shrugged. "Only ride I've got. But they need to be safe." Maya stared at him. In this world, people didn't do things like this. Not for strangers. "Why would you help me?" He gave a soft, tired smile. "Because once, someone helped me, and I never got the chance to pay it back." The diner's neon sign flickered like a heartbeat through the rain. Maya pulled into the gravel lot, the old truck sputtering but holding strong. Steam hissed from the hood as she parked under the awning, shielding her children from the worst of the downpour. Inside, warmth hit her like a wall, bacon grease, coffee, and heat from a humming space heater in the corner. A kind-eyed waitress brought towels and cocoa without being asked. Maya sat at the booth, watching Eli and Ava huddle together, cheeks flushed and hands wrapped around chipped ceramic mugs. They were safe, dry, breathing. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone. 1 bar of service. She snapped a picture of the truck, rain trailing down its hood like tears, and typed, "A stranger gave me the only vehicle he owns so I could get my kids to safety during a flood." Didn't ask for anything. Just said, someone once helped me. This is what humanity still looks like. His name is Nate. Thank you, wherever you are. She hit post. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and then forgot about it. By sunrise, her inbox was flooded. 30K likes, 200K, then 500,000. She scrolled through thousands of comments. Faith in humanity restored. We need more Nates in this world. Someone find this man. Let's change his life. A local news station messaged her. Then another. Then NBC. Her heart raced. This was spiraling fast. Back at the highway, Nate had spent the night under a tarp, headlamp strapped to his forehead, elbows deep in her van. When Maya pulled up at first light, the van was running, heater blasting. She stepped out, overwhelmed. Nate, you didn't have to stay. He just grinned, smudged with oil. Told you I'd fix it. She hugged him. Hard. You're going to want to check your phone, she said. He pulled it out of his jacket, squinting at the dozens of missed calls and messages. What the hell? She showed him the post. His face drained. You didn't have to do that. I didn't mean for it to explode like this, Maya replied. But people needed to see what you did. That's when the station van rolled up. Then another. Reporters, mics, flashing lights. Nate looked like a deer in headlights. This isn't what I signed up for, he muttered. The next 72 hours were chaos. A GoFundMe launched in Nate's name hit $100,000 before noon. News anchors called him the highway hero. Offers poured in from across the country. Interviews, job offers, donations of tools and parts. But Nate wasn't celebrating. He turned down every interview, closed his old flip phone, boarded up his small repair shed to escape the circus. I don't want a spotlight, he told Maya. Just wanted to help. Then came the call. An assistant for someone named Reed Bennett. She said her boss wanted to meet Nate in person. Privately. Nate had no idea who that was. Maya did. Her jaw dropped. You're kidding. Reed Bennett? The billionaire? He funds housing for veterans, pays off hospital bills. He's real. He sees things most people ignore. Nate frowned. Why would he want to meet me? Maya smiled. Because the world finally sees what kind of man you are. Nate wasn't sure what to expect when he walked into the polished office of Reed Bennett's corporate headquarters. The floors gleamed like they hadn't seen a speck of dust in decades. The walls were lined with framed pictures of Reed with politicians, athletes, even a few celebrities. A golden plaque on the door read, Reed Bennett, founder, visionary. He wasn't here for accolades. He was here because Maya had insisted. Reed's assistant led him through the halls, past luxurious furnishings, to a grand conference room. Reed Bennett stood by the window, looking out over the city skyline, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit. He was tall, with a chiseled jaw and eyes that seemed to see through everything. He turned as Nate entered, his expression unreadable. Mr. Mitchell, I've been wanting to meet you. Nate shifted uneasily in his boots. Didn't think I'd be sitting in front of someone like you. Reed smiled. Most people don't. But sometimes, it's the quiet ones who make the loudest impacts. Nate stood still, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. I don't need anything. Just wanted to help a mom and her kids. I know, Reed said softly, his gaze unwavering. But the world has changed, and that kind of generosity doesn't go unnoticed. Which is why I'm here. Nate's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Reed walked over to the sleek, glass desk and sat down, motioning for Nate to take a seat. I've been running a philanthropic organization for years, but we've never had someone like you. Someone who doesn't seek fame, who doesn't want anything in return. That's rare. Nate shook his head, still confused. I didn't do it for attention. I did it because it felt right. I understand, Reed replied. Which is exactly why I want to offer you something. Nate's stomach tightened. What's the catch? There's no catch. But I can help you, Reed said, leaning forward. I'm offering to pay off your debts. Give you a fully stocked auto shop, state-of-the-art equipment. I've seen what you're capable of, Nate. I want you to have the chance to do it on a larger scale. The offer hit Nate like a slap. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, let alone offers of help that came without strings. I don't know what to say, Nate muttered, his voice thick. I never asked for anything. Just wanted to fix cars. You can do that, and more. Reed's eyes softened. You have the skills, but you need the resources. I can provide that. Nate ran his hand over his face, trying to process. His mind raced, but there was something pulling him back. Why me? Reed didn't immediately answer. Instead, he sat back in his chair, his fingers steepled in thought. You have the humility many people don't. In my line of work, that's rare. And rare is valuable. Nate shifted uncomfortably. It's not about the money. I'm just a mechanic. Reed leaned forward again. That's what you think. But a mechanic can be more than just a mechanic. You can create jobs. You can fix lives, one car at a time. The world needs more people who believe in helping without expecting anything in return. And you, Nate, can be that person. Nate looked out the window, his heart pounding. He wanted to say yes, wanted to believe in the opportunity. But there was something gnawing at him, a memory that refused to let go, a mistake from his past, a promise he hadn't kept. I can't accept this, Nate said, his voice quiet. Not yet. Reed raised an eyebrow. Why not? Nate swallowed, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. I've got unfinished business. Things I can't outrun. Reed studied him for a long moment before standing up and walking around the desk. He placed a hand on Nate's shoulder. I can't force you to take the offer. But remember this, no one's life is without debt. We all have a past. But that doesn't mean it should control us. Nate nodded, though the weight of his past still held him tight. Thanks, but I'll think on it. Reed didn't press further. Take your time. But remember, helping others is a path that can lead to your own redemption. Nate stood, still conflicted. He wasn't sure what he wanted more, to accept Reed's offer and change his life, or to keep running from the ghosts that never seemed to stop chasing him. The days after his meeting with Reed Bennett felt like a fog. Nate couldn't shake the words Reed had said to him. Asterisk. Helping others is a path that can lead to your own redemption. Asterisk. Redemption. That word kept echoing in his mind. He'd been running for so long, trying to outrun the mistakes of his past. Could he really step into the light? Could he accept an offer like Reed's and start over? Or would the shadows pull him back? The problem was, Nate wasn't just running from his past. He was running from something far more complicated. A promise he had made years ago. A promise he had failed to keep. It had been a decade since Nate had last seen his brother, Danny. The two had grown up together, but life had torn them apart. When their parents died in a car accident, it was supposed to be a wake-up call. But instead, Danny had spiraled into a dark world of drugs and bad decisions. Nate, determined not to follow that path, had left their small town behind. He'd worked his way through mechanic school and built a life from the ground up. But he never forgot about Danny. The guilt still gnawed at him. He had promised to look after his brother, but when Danny needed him most, Nate had been too focused on his own survival. He could still remember the last phone call he'd gotten from Danny, a year after he'd left town. "Don't come back, Nate," Danny had said, his voice slurred. I'm fine. But Nate knew he wasn't fine. He had tried to go back, tried to help, but by then, Danny had disappeared into the streets, swallowed by addiction and desperation. Nate had tried to bury it, tried to pretend like it wasn't his fault. But now, the past was knocking at his door. The phone rang late one evening, pulling Nate from his thoughts. He had just finished dinner, alone, sitting in the small kitchen of his rundown apartment. He stared at the screen for a moment. It was an unknown number, but something told him he couldn't ignore it. Hello? Is this Nate Mitchell? The voice on the other end was gruff, clipped. It is, Nate replied, his heart racing. You don't know me, but you know my brother. Danny Mitchell. Nate froze. He felt the blood drain from his face. Where is he? Nate demanded, standing up from his chair. What happened to him? There was a long pause before the voice responded, quieter now. He's in the hospital, Nate. Overdose. Barely hanging on. The world around Nate spun. His mind scrambled, trying to piece together what this meant. He hadn't heard from Danny in over a year, and now this. His brother was dying, and Nate hadn't been there to help him. Where is he? Nate repeated, his voice breaking. The voice on the other end gave him an address, and Nate hung up without another word. The drive to the hospital felt like a blur. Every minute, every second, stretched longer than the last. He fought back the panic rising in his chest, trying to focus on the road, but his mind kept flashing back to the past. The arguments, the silence, the guilt. By the time he arrived, it was well past midnight. The fluorescent lights in the hospital hallway flickered as he made his way to the intensive care unit. His heart thudded in his chest as he approached the room where Danny lay, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily in time with his shallow breathing. Nate pushed the door open, and there Danny was. Thin, worn, a shadow of the brother he once knew. His face was pale, his skin clammy, but his eyes flickered when he saw Nate. "Nate," Danny croaked, his voice weak but desperate. "I'm sorry, man. I didn't want you to see me like this." Nate's throat tightened. "I'm here, Danny. I'm here now." He sat beside the bed, gripping Danny's hand as if holding on to the last piece of family he had left. The years of distance, of mistakes, felt heavy in the air between them. Nate had failed him, but maybe, just maybe, he still had a chance to make things right. "I should have been here sooner," Nate whispered. "I should have." Danny squeezed his hand. "It's not your fault. It's my mess. But you came back, Nate. You came back when I needed you the most." Tears welled up in Nate's eyes as he gazed at his brother, his heart breaking all over again. This wasn't just about the past. It was about the future. About redemption, not just for him, but for Danny too. Nate swallowed hard. "You're not getting rid of me again. I'm not going anywhere." Danny gave a faint smile, his eyelids fluttering as he drifted in and out of consciousness. I'm sorry I messed up your life, bro. I didn't want you to." "No more apologies," Nate cut him off gently. "We get through this together, okay?" The following days were a blur of hospital visits, late-night conversations, and silent prayers. Nate stayed by his brother's side, helping him recover, but he knew deep down that his life was at a crossroads. The offer from Reed Bennett was still there, waiting. A new auto shop, financial security, a future. But Nate's future wasn't about cars. It wasn't about money. It was about family. It was about second chances. He had always believed that helping others was the right thing to do. And now, it was time to help his brother, to give him the chance Nate never got. But was he ready to accept Reed's offer? Was he ready to step into a life that would demand more than he had ever given? Nate glanced down at his phone, checking the missed calls from Reed. The world outside was still calling him to something greater. And for the first time in a long time, Nate didn't feel like he was running anymore. Nate stood on the edge, his feet teetering between two worlds. He had always lived life by the code that survival came first. Always keep your head down, keep working, never trust too easily. But something inside him had shifted. The storm he had weathered with Maya and her kids, the weight of his brother's suffering. It all collided in his chest, an overwhelming reminder that life wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about confronting it. He could feel the pull of Reed Bennett's offer like a tether, drawing him closer to something new, something better. A chance to rebuild his life, to be more than the mechanic who fixed broken cars. But was it enough? Was it enough to fill the empty space in his heart, the space left by years of silence and regret? Nate picked up his phone. There were a dozen missed calls from Reed's assistant, several more from Maya. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. He didn't want to make the call, didn't want to admit he was even considering the offer. But then his thoughts turned to Danny, lying in that hospital bed, still fighting for a future that had been stolen from him long ago. The phone rang. Reed Bennett's office. A voice answered, quick and efficient. "It's Nate Mitchell. Is Reed available?" There was a pause. "I'll let him know you're on the line." Moments later, Reed's calm, composed voice came through. "Nate, I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me." "I haven't," Nate replied, his voice tight. "I've just been thinking about the offer." Reed chuckled softly. "I'm glad to hear that. You've earned it, Nate. You've done more than most could dream of, and I believe you can do even more. This isn't just about a shop. This is about changing lives." Nate rubbed his face, trying to clear the exhaustion that had settled in his bones. "I don't know if I'm ready. I have things in my past that—" "Everyone has a past," Reed interrupted, a trace of something like understanding in his voice. "What matters is what you do with your future." Nate let the words sink in. He could feel the weight of them, like a decision he wasn't sure he could make. "I'll need some time," Nate finally said. "I can't just take a leap like that. Not yet." "I understand," Reed said, his voice still steady. "But I'll say this. Sometimes, it's the hardest decisions that lead to the greatest rewards. Don't let fear hold you back, Nate. You've got more potential than you realize." The call ended with a click. Nate stared at his phone, a small tremor running through his hands. What if he couldn't make it? What if the new life he dreamed of was just another illusion? The next morning, as he walked into the hospital to visit Danny, something inside Nate finally shifted. The fear, the doubt, the guilt, they all melted away in the quiet hum of the ICU. Danny had stabilized overnight, but he was still fragile, a shell of the brother Nate had once known. But now, there was a chance to rebuild. Nate pulled up a chair beside the bed. "Hey, you're still with me, huh?" he said, trying to lighten the mood. Danny gave a weak, almost imperceptible smile. "I'm trying, man. I don't know how you do it. You keep going." Nate nodded, his hand gripping his brother's. "Because that's what we do, Danny. We keep going. And I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." Danny's eyes flickered with emotion. "I don't deserve this, you know. I don't deserve you coming back for me." "You don't have to deserve it," Nate said quietly. "We're family, and I'm going to help you get through this, no matter what." As he sat there, watching Danny sleep, a sense of clarity settled over him. He had been running from his past, thinking that the only way to move forward was to bury it. But he couldn't bury it anymore. His past was a part of him, and if he wanted to move forward, he had to face it head-on. He couldn't keep hiding behind the fear of failure. The truth was, he had already crossed the line. The choice was no longer about whether to take Reed's offer or not. It was about whether he could live with the kind of man he wanted to be. And if he was going to become the person Reed believed he could be, the first step was accepting his past, not running from it. The day Reed's assistant called again, Nate was ready. "I'm in," he said without hesitation. There was silence on the other end. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Later that evening, after the hospital visit, Nate stood outside in the cool air, looking at the sky. The weight of his decision pressed against his chest, but there was a spark of something inside him, a flicker of hope he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had control over it. Maybe it was the promise of a better life, or maybe it was just knowing that he had finally made a choice to step into the light. Nate's first day at the new shop felt like a dream. The space was massive, filled with state-of-the-art tools and equipment that gleamed under the bright fluorescent lights. It smelled like fresh rubber, oil, and metal, everything he had ever hoped for but never dared to expect. This wasn't just a garage, it was a full-fledged auto repair empire in the making. He walked through the empty space, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The floor had been polished to a shine, the bay doors open to the sunlight streaming in. It was all so much more than he had ever imagined. He could feel Reed's presence, the weight of the offer, and the trust that had been placed in him. And yet, it felt foreign, like someone else's life. As he stood by one of the workbenches, he heard the crunch of gravel outside the building. He glanced up, just in time to see Maya pull up in her minivan. She stepped out, her face lighting up when she saw him. "You're here already," she said, her voice filled with awe. "I couldn't wait," Nate replied with a grin, motioning for her to come inside. Maya walked in, her eyes widening as she took in the vastness of the shop. "This is incredible, Nate. I can't believe this is yours." "I still can't believe it myself," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I've got the space. Now, I just need to make it work." Maya stepped up beside him, her gaze sweeping across the room. "This is your chance, Nate. You've got the skills. And now you've got the resources to turn this into something amazing." He nodded slowly, but there was a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. He had always been a lone wolf. He had built his reputation by fixing cars, not by running a business. He didn't know the first thing about managing employees, handling finances, or building a brand. It was all too much, too soon. "You sure you're ready for this?" Maya asked, her tone soft but sincere. Nate paused, looking out over the empty shop floor. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the edge of something that could change everything. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I don't think I can back down now." Maya smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're stronger than you think. You've been through worse." He chuckled, the sound of it rough and real. "Yeah, but that doesn't make me less scared." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Nate spent every waking hour at the shop, getting the place up and running. He hired a few local mechanics, most of whom were eager to work under someone who seemed to know what he was doing. But even as he began to put the pieces of the business together, the fear lingered. Would they respect him? Would the shop succeed? Was he even cut out for this? His past kept pulling at him like a dark thread woven into the fabric of his present. One afternoon, after a particularly long day of work, Nate took a break and stepped outside for some fresh air. He leaned against the side of the building, closing his eyes as he breathed in the cool evening air. Suddenly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Danny. "Hey man, I'm getting better. Still not great, but I'm trying. I don't know what I'd do without you." Nate's heart clenched as he read the message. Danny was recovering, slowly but surely. But it wasn't just his brother he was helping. It was himself, too. Helping Danny, offering him a second chance, giving him the opportunity to rebuild, had forced Nate to face the very things he'd been avoiding for so long. It wasn't just about building a business. It was about healing the wounds that had been festering for years. The past was always there, lurking in the corners of his mind, but it no longer controlled him. He was finally able to look at it without flinching, without the crippling weight of guilt. He knew this path wouldn't be easy, but with every challenge, he was slowly shedding the weight of the past and building a future. His future. The next few months were a blur of long hours, hard work, and small victories. Slowly but surely, the shop gained traction. Word spread about Nate's work ethic, and business began to pick up. The steady stream of cars in need of repair helped him pay the bills, but more than that, it built a reputation. People trusted him. They respected him. But not everyone was happy with Nate's success. It started with a few whispers. The old mechanic who owned a competing shop across town. He didn't like the way Nate had come in and taken over the market. He didn't like how Reed Bennett's name kept coming up when people talked about Nate's business. He didn't like how, for once, someone who wasn't rich or connected had the chance to make something of themselves. Nate heard the rumors, but he ignored them. He was too busy trying to keep up with the demands of the shop. But the tension was there, and Nate could feel it in the air. The rivalry was growing. The competition was getting personal. One afternoon, as Nate worked on a customer's car, he overheard a conversation between two of his employees. "Did you hear what happened at Tom's shop?" one of them said, his voice low. "He's been talking about getting back at Nate. He doesn't think he deserves all this attention." Nate's stomach tightened. He knew that Tom, his competitor, wasn't the type to back down. But he wasn't about to let anyone threaten what he had worked so hard to build. As the weeks passed, the competition intensified. Tom's shop started spreading lies about Nate's business practices. Customers were leaving, rumors were spreading, and the once thriving shop began to falter. Nate couldn't stand by and watch it all slip away. He was forced to confront Tom, a confrontation he'd hoped to avoid. Nate stared at the storefront of Tom's auto repair shop from across the street. The windows were cracked, the faded closed sign hanging at an odd angle. It was obvious that the shop was struggling, the paint peeling and the parking lot empty except for a rusted truck that hadn't been moved in days. It was exactly what Tom had been threatening for weeks, a slow burn. And now, it had come to this, a direct confrontation. Nate's palms were sweaty as he turned his truck off and stepped out into the cold morning air. He had tried to avoid this. He had tried to just focus on his shop, his customers, and rebuilding his life. But Tom wasn't content with just losing in silence. He had started attacking Nate's reputation, spreading lies about the quality of his work and the connections he'd used to get the shop off the ground. Word was getting around, and slowly but surely, Nate was losing customers. He wasn't going to let it continue. He had come too far. As he walked toward the entrance, the door swung open, and Tom stepped out, leaning against the doorframe with a smirk. His greasy hair hung over his eyes, and his worn-out work boots scraped against the pavement as he sized Nate up. "Thought you'd show up sooner or later," Tom said, his voice thick with contempt. Nate crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. "You're making a mistake, Tom." "Oh, I'm making a mistake?" Tom's voice rose, his tone mocking. "You really think the town's going to keep handing you business because you were lucky enough to get Reed Bennett's attention? You've got a lot to learn about real work, Nate." "I've been doing this since I was a kid," Nate snapped. "It's not luck. It's hard work. And I'm not here to fight with you, Tom. I'm here to fix this." Tom sneered, taking a step forward. "Fix what? You think you can buy your way into this town? People see you for what you are, Nate. A wannabe. A flash in the pan who's only here because of a rich benefactor. You don't belong here." Nate's chest tightened, but he didn't back down. "I belong here just as much as anyone else. And I'm not going anywhere." "Yeah." Tom pushed off from the doorframe and took another step closer, his eyes narrowing. "We'll see about that." Nate's mind raced. He could feel the heat of Tom's hostility burning through the space between them. This wasn't just about a business rivalry anymore. It was personal. "Listen," Nate said, his voice steady despite the growing tension. "You've had your time. People are talking, and if you keep trying to tear down my reputation, you won't be able to recover. You're better off making peace with the fact that things have changed." Tom laughed. the sound cold and humorless. Peace? I don't want peace, Nate. I want you gone. And I'll make sure the rest of the town feels the same way. The two men stood there for a long, tense moment, the storm between them thickening. Nate's fists clenched at his sides, but he knew that fighting back with anger wasn't the solution. This wasn't just about the shop. It was about something deeper, a battle between old and new, between a man who had fought for his place in the world and one who was too proud to accept change. Nate took a deep breath. You can keep fighting if you want, but it won't change anything. I'm not leaving, and I'll keep working harder than anyone else. So you can either step aside, or you can keep making enemies. Your choice. Tom's face twisted in fury, but instead of responding with another insult, he simply turned and walked back into his shop without another word. Nate stood still for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest, before turning and heading back to his truck. He didn't want to keep fighting. He didn't want to keep having these battles with people who couldn't see past their own pride. But he was done running from conflict. He was done letting people tear him down. This was his life now, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it away from him. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Nate sat in his office at the shop, staring out at the empty bays. The sounds of clinking tools and engine parts still echoed in his mind. He had won the confrontation with Tom, but the victory felt hollow. The real battle was still ahead of him. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Maya. "How's it going, Nate? Hope you're holding up okay." Nate stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "It's been a rough day, but I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere." A few seconds later, her reply came through. "Good. Don't let anyone take away what you've built. You've worked too hard for it." Nate smiled, the weight of her words sinking in. He had worked hard, and he was finally starting to believe he deserved this, deserved a chance at something better. But as he sat back in his chair, staring at the flickering lights of his shop, he couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. The ghosts of his past, the ones he had tried so hard to outrun, were still lurking in the shadows, waiting to drag him down. But Nate wasn't afraid anymore. He had fought his way through the darkness once before, and he would do it again if it meant building something that lasted. The day started like any other. The sun barely rose over the horizon, casting a golden light over the shop's front windows. Nate stood at the counter, sorting through the day's appointments, the hum of the engines and the clatter of tools creating a steady rhythm around him. His life had been a whirlwind ever since that first decision to accept Reed's offer. The shop was booming. Employees were happy. And for the first time in years, Nate allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could turn his life around. But as the clock ticked closer to noon, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. Nate hesitated for only a moment before picking it up. "Hello, Nate Mitchell." A voice on the other end was familiar, but distant. It took a second for Nate to place it. "Yeah, this is Nate. Who's this?" "It's Danny. It's Danny Mitchell." Nate's stomach dropped. He hadn't heard his brother's voice in weeks. The sound of it was both comforting and unsettling. He hadn't known how to help Danny as much as he wanted to, but that didn't mean he'd abandoned him. "What's going on, Danny?" Nate asked, his voice laced with concern. "I need to see you," Danny said, his voice cracking. "I'm in trouble. Bad trouble." Nate's pulse quickened. "What kind of trouble? Where are you?" "I'm at the old warehouse off Bridge Street. You have to come." I don't know who else to turn to, Nate. I'm scared." Nate's mind raced. He'd been down this road before. The desperate calls, the half-truths, the promises of change that never seemed to come. But this time, something was different. There was a genuine fear in Danny's voice, a vulnerability that Nate hadn't heard in years. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Nate said, not giving Danny the chance to say another word. He grabbed his jacket, grabbed his keys, and rushed out of the shop without a second thought. The warehouse was dark and forgotten, tucked away in the industrial part of town, far from the light of the more developed areas. As Nate pulled up, he noticed the broken windows, the rusted gate, the emptiness of the place. This was no place for someone like Danny, someone who was trying to turn his life around. And yet, here he was, caught up in something Nate couldn't understand. He parked the truck and stepped out into the quiet night. The air was thick with tension, a heavy feeling that settled in his chest. He could hear nothing but the occasional rustle of a distant car and the soft creak of the warehouse as the wind pushed against its old frame. Nate walked toward the entrance, heart pounding, fists clenched. Every step brought him closer to whatever mess his brother had gotten himself into. But as he neared the door, something shifted inside him, a gut feeling that something wasn't right. The door was ajar. "Danny," Nate called, stepping into the darkness. A few moments passed before a faint light flickered on inside the warehouse, casting long shadows across the walls. Nate's eyes adjusted, and that's when he saw them. Danny stood in the middle of the room, but he wasn't alone. A group of men, dark figures with stern faces, stood behind him, their eyes locked on Nate. The leader of the group, a man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward, his lips curling into a cruel grin. Well, look who finally showed up." Nate's breath caught in his throat. "What is this, Danny? What's going on?" Danny's face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "Nate, I didn't have a choice. These guys, they're dangerous. I owed them money, and they threatened me. They said if I didn't deliver you." Nate's heart sank. "They wanted me? Not just you," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "They wanted the business. They wanted you to fix their cars, to work for them. They said if you didn't, they'd hurt me. Hurt you." Nate's blood ran cold. The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just a favor to help his brother. This was a trap. And now he was standing face to face with a group of criminals who thought they could control him. "Get away from him," Nate growled, his voice steady but full of menace. The scarred man laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, we don't want trouble. We just want you to work for us, Mr. Mitchell. You're good with cars, right? A little talent goes a long way in our line of work." Nate's mind spun. He could feel the weight of his decisions, the pressure of his past, and his present. This was the final test, the point where his redemption would either come crashing down or he would rise above it. He glanced at Danny, who was trembling, his face pale with fear. "You don't have to do this," Nate said, his voice low but firm. "I'm not working for you, and I'm not letting you take my brother again." The man's grin faded, and he stepped forward, his voice threatening. "You're making a mistake, Mitchell. This doesn't end well for you." But Nate had no choice. He couldn't let fear rule his life anymore. He had fought for this, his shop, his future, his family. And he wasn't about to lose it now. He stepped forward, positioning himself between Danny and the group of men. "I'll handle this my way," Nate said, his fists clenching. Minutes later, the police arrived. It turned out that one of Tom's old contacts had tipped off the authorities. The entire thing had been a setup, a test to see if Nate would back down. But he hadn't. Not this time. The men were arrested, the warehouse was cleared out, and Danny was taken into custody for questioning. But as Nate stood outside, watching the flashing lights, he realized that this was the moment. The moment when he had truly crossed the line. He had faced down his demons, his past, his fears, his guilt, and he had chosen to fight for his future. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of that decision lift. As the police drove off with Danny in the back of their cruiser, Nate stood alone in the quiet of the night. His shop was still there, his second chance still intact. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, there was no doubt about that. But Nate knew now that he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a man who had fought for his redemption, who had refused to back down, and who had built something worth fighting for. And no one could take that from him. Nate had walked through the fire and come out stronger, not because life had been kind, but because he had made the choice to rise above. His journey wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about fixing himself, rebuilding the pieces of his life that had been shattered by fear, guilt, and the weight of his past. And in the end, it wasn't the shop that defined him. It was his ability to choose courage over fear, love over hatred, and redemption over regret. This story is a reminder that redemption isn't handed to you. It's earned, one choice at a time. So what will you choose today?